Hi, this is your host Abdul Bhartia and welcome to TFR Newsroom. And today we have with us once again Stewart, Vice President of Dependable Embedded Systems at the Linux Foundation. It's good to have you back on the show.
Great to be back here. Thank you very much.
It's my pleasure. And today we are going to talk about major release version 3.0 of SPDX. Before we talk about what's new features of this release, quickly tell our viewers what is SPDX all about and what kind of problem it solves for the larger industry.
So SPDX is a way of describing the metadata about the supply chain, about all the elements in a supply chain, and then how they relate to each other over time. So it's traditionally called like an SBOM. SBOM is one of the common names you're seeing, but SPDX actually stands for System Package Data Exchange. We used to be called just software, but we've expanded way beyond software. So we went to shifting the name to be System Package Data Exchange because that more reflects what's actually being captured nowadays.
What are the major challenges that you feel, you see that industry faces, and how far SPDX goes to address some of those challenges?
What was being traditionally called for an SBOM from the NTIA minimum and from other places, we've been able to handle for 5+ years. And in fact, it's an ISO standard. And so with that, we've taken it to be an international standard, and it's been that way, and it's being used that way already. However, the challenge we were seeing with the supply chain is it isn't just software and hardware anymore. Or it's now realistically data. How is the data created? How is the data curated? How has it evolved over time? And then, models. AI is, they're everywhere right now. And so the question is, are we keeping the right level of metadata for the AI models in order to do the proper risk analysis? And, can you express, this model was trained on this data set, it was tested against this data set, it was validated against this data set. Can you express that type of information? Because that all could be sources of risk, especially as people talk about poison data sets and so forth. So expanding SPDX so that we could capture the AI and the data was one of the big focuses. The other big focus was people wanted to record a lot of the security information. And so while an SBOM traditionally doesn't have security information in it, you may want to create something in the same format and associate it with it effectively. So SPDX is now able to generate out VEX statements, which is something else that people are looking for from the security side. And then the other thing that just showed up with the 3.0 is a build profile, because people want to record how was things built. And we're going to need a lot of these pieces as we head towards safety and dependability, quite frankly. And so getting things ready so that we can actually go after safe systems, we need more than just the traditional ingredients of software. We need to basically understand, obviously, the AI, the data set for self-driving cars, things like that. But we also need to start looking at, what hardware is this actual software running on? Because, when we had Spectre and Meltdown, it was the interaction between the hardware and the kernels. And we had to make sure that the things were lining up properly. And so sometimes we're going to need to be able to convey that type of information. So there's work going on, has been for about half a year now, about extending to a hardware profile and also extending into the functional safety profiles and the services and operations. So you've got some master metadata for your supply chain, and you can basically choose what information you want to carry forward with it. We basically went to a higher concept of sometimes it's getting called XBOM in places, but we basically have a core element, and then you can select which profiles of data you really want to capture and carry with it. And it's going to vary based on your use case and the risk. So we're trying to make it as flexible as possible and make it modular so that the tooling can work with it effectively.
What kind of release cadence that is there for SPDX? Is it like you go for yearly release, or it's like, well, depending on what features we want to add? When it's mature, it's open source, so we'll release it when it's ready. And then second will be highlights for this 3.0 release.
Basically, the 3.0 has been, a couple of years in the making. And that was mostly because we were trying to re-architect the whole underlying model of it. Before, we always had a model for SPDX, but what we wanted to do was merge in with some of the things so that it's going to be more effective to put into a database, for instance. and quite frankly, to be able to work with product lines over time. And so bringing in the whole concept of time, and so that you can, query and understand what was what at a certain point in time is going to be key for managing these things at scale. And that's why, companies like Microsoft and Google have been very much involved with us, is to make sure that we could do this in an efficient way for them. So we just put out the SPDX 3.0, and we put a release candidate out last year. Because it was such a radical change for us, it wasn't just an incremental, let's just add another little bit of stuff. We really had re-architected. So we put out the release candidate one last year, and this year we've put out the release now. And with that, we're basically starting to move our tooling infrastructures all over to it. We did prototyping of the tooling infrastructure changes throughout the last year to make sure it was solid and it could be moved to. It wasn't just like a small document. We actually, that we had Python libraries and we had Java libraries basically proving out the concepts. And so now all the last little bits are in. And what we're doing is this version also went through a review at the OMG group. And so we've basically had two groups joining forces to pull this back together. And the architecture board at OMG has approved it as well. And so we'll probably look at, as tools get implementing it and so forth, and there's no big surprises, we might look at taking it to ISO in the fall, is what we're looking at. And then we'll be starting to add in the next set of new features, and then figure out a logical place to take things forward. So we plan on keeping it as an international formal standard, but it is open for anyone to work on. All you have to pretty much do is, sign up to the mail list and show up at the meetings, and you can express your opinion. If you think there's gaps, open pull requests, or issues for that matter, and just let us know, hey, how do I handle this use case? And if we can't do it with what we've got already encoded into this specification, then we're certainly interested in trying to extend it. That's how some of these other profiles emerged, actually, is they're sort of like the AI and the data, that the AI stuff started happening 2 years ago, for instance. And we started looking at what was available out there. There were various papers out from Microsoft, from Google, and from IBM, and we went through them all, tried to figure out what's common denominators, and most of the stuff was already in our spec, but there was new properties like, is there sensitive personal information involved? There's things that are aligned with the ethics. There's, what sort of energy consumption requirements we're going to have. And a lot of this stuff, we basically did our homework here, and we surveyed all the IEEE ethical standards as well as, some of these other model cards, data sheets, fact sheets, initiatives to try to figure out, okay, what are the sets of things that people want to do to use for doing the risk analysis? And so that informed what emerged in the AI and the data set profiles. And right now we're looking at, CISA had basically earlier, I guess at the end of last year, put out a white paper about hardware bill of materials. The trouble is for us is that it was only looking at the physical hardware. It wasn't looking at virtual hardware. And things like digital twins are playing an increasingly important role in being able to encapsulate that, this physical relates into this virtual version. And so you can be working with things remotely is important. So those are all the things that we're sort of looking at as a community. So there's a very active group going on right now for the hardware bill of materials. And we're working on, formalizing that up. And we're also, export control is a problem for people. And so all the operations people wanted to track that at the same time with the software rather than having it yet a separate other system. So making sure that these data, the data sets can basically expand to say this profile is valid and please expect these fields to be present is what will make these things scale, I think, into the whole supply chain over time for all the ingredients, not just the software.
Anything else from the feature point of view?
A lot of work is happening these days on trying to make sure we have an intake. Security vulnerabilities happen in our build infrastructure, okay? And actually understanding what is there at a point in time and how are things configured and how are things built is playing an increasing role, as well as, okay, what tools, what versions of the tools, et cetera. And so this is part of the reason that, the team working on DevSecOps at Google basically took the lead with some of our other members on defining what they need to monitor for actually catching and recording in their supply chain. And so we have a build profile now sitting in there. And I'm expecting going forward, these are just starting points, but At this point now, we've got our good foundation, and so we can add discrete features over time. So I think we'll probably see the 3.1 showing up, early next year. So I'm hoping we'll get more towards a yearly cadence with this, and it'll just be new features, and we will not have to go through a major rework again of our underlying structure for quite a while. This is our first one that we've had to do a really underlying rework of our structure since 2015. We had to do it then as well. So we've gone through this transition before. We sort of know what we're up against. And what we've got, though, is we want to make sure we can really get to the safety side. And so there's work going on to prototype some of the future versions of things right now, even in various tools associated with safety in terms of requirement management and so forth. And so all these things will hopefully play together, but the build is one aspect, getting the AI, getting the data sets, the provenance and tracing, and working with more data scientists to make sure we're catching what they care about for the analysis. These are all things. So I think you'll see these profiles continue to evolve the same way the licensing profile has evolved since we started the project. And right now, and we also have an SPDX Lite profile. The team that worked on the first version of Lite for 2.3 basically came back and has moved it forward into what they need from 3.0. So that's persisting, and we've also got information on how to use SPDX for security as an annex in this specification now. So if you're trying to figure out, okay, how do I work with my VEX, or how do I work with a disclosure, we've got examples. So we're trying to make it as easy as possible for people to just do the right thing and figure it out pragmatically.
And as we're already talking about, when we come to SBOMs, it's just not about security. It could be tracking, copyrights, a lot of things. How does it also, do you have separate profiles? You did touch upon that. So depending on which player is using SPDX for whatever use case and purpose, it is suitable for that.
That's exactly the idea of profiles. So if the security people just want to be tracking, the core information for software, they can. But if the legal team in that organization says, no, I want you to track the licensing stuff at the same time, then that profile needs to get turned on. And if so basically someone who's being, this is getting sent out, and they want to know all the known vulnerabilities associated with this as you generate your SBOM for what's going out of your organization, we have ways of now capturing that by turning on the security profile. So what we're trying to do is be able to, as needs of customers in the supply chain dictate, you can figure out which material you want to put out and make available. But it can all go in the same database, and that's the key, so that we can all hook things up from one SBOM to another, and so forth, so we can actually keep it very modular. And rather, like I say, there's some assumptions in certain parts of the industry that everything goes into one document for an SBOM, but we're finding out that just doesn't scale. People have to basically put something on, because at the end of the day, your product is my component. It's pretty common in the supply chain industry, because people, it's, you basically create your product, you've got your SBOM for your product, but then how do you put it into another big document, right? It's much more efficient to link with trust to that other document and be able to pull it all into a database to be able to reason about it and try to find those hidden dependencies down the road, where there's libraries and things that people get changed on people. And quite frankly, as you've taken and deployed something in the field, you're going to configure how it gets deployed out. Well, you need to keep that configuration information, because that may also be a factor in whether you're vulnerable or not to some sort of issue. And now we can.
Who would be the target audience? Is it like purely developers? It could also be CISOs or security folks. It could be lawyers, or it's purely for technical folks.
It's all of them. Basically, the technical folks, we made it easier for technical folks to write tools about it, but there are people who have to consume the information from those tools to make risk analysis. So we're trying to make it easier to do the risk analysis. Is this software safe or not to use? Or is there a problem over time that has emerged from parts in the open source, and detect it and be able to work with it? We have to do this, like I say, security is obviously the obvious use case for there, but realistically there's licensing risk. And if someone changes a license on a project, all of a sudden that becomes a risk. And you need to be able to surface that, because that may be a problem for you to ship it or work with it. licensing changes over time sometimes too, as we've been seeing in the industry recently. So all of these are parts of the reason some of the re-architecting happened, is so we could respond and work more efficiently with this.
Can you also talk about some of the use cases of SPDX that you have seen over time?
We're seeing SPDX used for tracking software for OSPOs. Basically, they've been using SPDX for tracking software for OSPOs for 10 plus years. And more we're seeing it being used for tracking the build and provenance information. So what's actually been assembled as builds. There's some projects out there that have already moved towards automatically generating this, so it's very accurate, as opposed to a tool discovering it after the fact. It's more as it builds, the information gets recorded. So like the Zephyr project and the Yocto project, both have been doing this already for a couple of years now. If you turn on an option, you have to turn the option on, but the option is there and that's all it really requires. And then, so we're seeing the project starting to apply it, the open source project starting to apply it, the packaging and the distros starting to apply it. And then we're seeing, some of the package managers and so forth adopting it. Certainly the adoption of the SPDX IDs is pretty much universal now throughout the industry. It's an easier way of expressing things and it's much more machine readable. So making it easier for the developers to be able to pull the right information out when it's available and then encapsulate it in a way that can be shared widely is part of the challenge. And I think we're starting to get there now. So, the tools, the companies that are basically the small companies that are trying to manage risk, the hospitals trying to look at, okay, is there a vulnerability in some of these, medical devices I've got? The automobile industry, all of these industries and vertical sectors are starting to depend on SBOMs for the transparency. And we're seeing it in the regulations too. The FDA is calling for a cybersecurity bill of materials that has an SBOM, but also has information about the devices and the services. And so those devices and services is, that gets to hardware and that gets to, the services profiles, which we're working on. But, you have to look at these things as a system now. The ingredients are not just software and parts of software. We need to know that, but we need to go wider. So I think you'll be seeing it, anything that has some degree of safety starting to show up more and more. And certainly, we know it's being used in the automotive, other systems, sectors.
What kind of ecosystem or organizations are there to support SPDX?
There's a rich set of commercial tooling that's available, some of which have open source parts and then have them services supplied, as well as proprietary tools that are working with it today. And what we're trying to do is build up our community of support for SPDX. And so getting more and more open source projects. And, part of the challenge that's going to be right now is working with the communities that already support SPDX and making it easy for them to go to 3.0 and emit 3.0. So this is why we've been doing a lot of work with libraries, for instance. So we've got like a Python library and a Java library and a Go library. And as these libraries move over, then anyone who's using those libraries just changes the option of what they're generating. So, we're trying to make it as easy to do the transition as possible. So these are pieces that are all sort of in flight and working their way forward.
Kate, thank you so much for taking time out today and talk about not only SPDX, the larger ecosystem, but also new features in this release. Thanks for great insights. And as usual, I look forward to talk to you again. Thank you.
Look forward to talking to you too. Good to see you again. Bye, Ho.